During Memorial Day at Lowe's, shop household must-haves for less. Save $80 on a Charbroil Performance Series 4-burner grill to chef up something special. Plus, get up to 45% off select major appliances to keep things fresh. Our best lineup is here at Lowe's. Lowe's, we help, you save. Valid through 5/27. While supplies last. Selection varies by location. See Lowes.com for details.
Visit your nearby Lowe's on East 17th Avenue in Hutchinson.
How you doing, everybody? Welcome to Scott Fox After 9. I apologize that today's episode is later than it usually is. I've been dealing with something that I haven't talked about on the pod, but I'm going to because it was almost kind of a social experiment, and wow, was I ever proven right. I'm at that point. It's been 10 years. Time to renew my Canadian passport. So I did what you're supposed to do. First thing I did was go and get a photo taken for my passport. Now, somebody had told me recently, you can go to Shoppers Drug Mart and they'll take a photo for your passport. And I thought, great. There's a Shoppers around the corner from me. So I went in there yesterday and I had to wait 10 minutes for the girl to get back from her lunch. But once she did, it was a seamless process. 3-4 minutes tops. And I had my passport photos. It was $28. I was shocked. Absolutely stunned. $28 for a non-professional. This was just a kid who works at Shoppers that they trained to take a photo. It took her 4 minutes max to do this. One employee making minimum wage. And they charged me $28 for a passport photo. Now, that's on me. I admit that's my fault. I should have asked up front, how much do you charge for a passport photo? And if she'd told me up front it's $28, I gladly would have went somewhere else. But I didn't know. So I paid my $28 and I was on my way. I had my very expensive photos and off to Service Canada. When I walked in, they told me there is a minimum 90-minute wait. 90 minutes. She suggested if I have to travel urgently, I could go to the passport office in Hamilton or in Brampton or in Mississauga. Well, I'm not traveling urgently. I certainly don't have any proof of travel, so that wasn't going to work for me. So I had to just get in the queue like everybody else. And I think that's part of the problem. I opted not to wait the 90 minutes. I said, you know what? I'll try a different office on another day. I'd read online that if you go when they first open up, you can get in there pretty quick. So I went to the Service Canada today, right near where the radio station is that I work at. I was in Brantford, Ontario, so I went to the Service Canada in Brantford. I figured that one would be a little bit quieter. Well, that one took me 51 minutes, and there was only 2 people in front of me. Nearest I can tell, Service Canada is probably the most inefficient operation in the country, and it's put on by the federal government, which has unlimited resources to make that system work. Such an inefficient process. And by the way, this is not a criticism of the staff. I know that they're just doing their job. But whoever's in charge of Service Canada, let me point out a few things to you. Number one, society doesn't work 9 to 5 anymore. Having your office open from 8:30 until 4 p.m. is completely useless. Useless. What happens if a teacher needs a passport renewed? What happens if a doctor needs a passport renewed or some other government service? You're telling me we need to have a teacher take a day out of the classroom, pay a supply teacher to come in and run her class just so she can get a government service? You've got to be kidding me. Why are they not open until at least 9 p.m.? By the way, when I was at the office yesterday, she suggested you can go online and book an appointment. I thought, okay, great. I'll just book an appointment online. The first one available was on July the 12th. 6 weeks from now to get an appointment. This is such an inefficient process. I walked in today. Somebody greeted me, made sure I had all my documents in place, which I did. They said, okay, have a seat and we'll call you up. Again, there were 2 people in front of me. 2. 51-minute wait. There was 2 people working, and they take an average, nearest I can tell, of about 15 minutes per person. Well, you do the math. They're not going to get a whole hell of a lot of people through between 8:30 and 4 when there's 2 people working and it's 15 minutes per appointment. I asked the guy, I said, what is it you guys normally deal with here? Is it all passports or what's the problem? They said it's mainly, especially at this time of year, the Canadian dental plan. A lot of seniors racing in to get their free dental care. And it's also a lot of pensions and things like that. You know, I've said this on the pod before. I can't think of a single thing that the federal or provincial government operates that runs efficiently. Service Canada is a disaster. You put somebody in there and tell them you can make a lot of money running this office if you just get people in and out very, very quickly and efficiently. You watch how quickly Service Canada would turn around, but it's a government operation and they don't care. And I find that unacceptable. For the amount of money that we pay to live in this country, that's completely unacceptable. That our one point of contact, physical contact with the federal government, is only open from 8:30 until 4, and there was 2 people working in there. 6 weeks to get an online appointment. That's the best our federal government can do. And by the way, I said it was a bit of a social experiment. Intentionally, knowing what was going to happen, I put that on X. And I got to tell you, if there was ever a doubt before, let me end that doubt right now. There is an army of civil servants and paid liberal influencers that are just there to defend the federal government. It is remarkable how many people had the attitude of, well, you should have planned out sooner. You should have, I don't know, I got all kinds of suggestions. Why didn't you go here? Why didn't you go there? Why didn't you renew it online? Well, it wouldn't let me renew it online, just so you know, for whatever reason. Not really sure. I'm caught up on my taxes. I don't owe anybody anything. I don't understand why I wouldn't be able to renew it online, but that was an issue. I had to actually go in person. The amount of people that say things like, shut up, you're overprivileged. You just wait like everybody else. No, I don't accept that attitude. I don't accept that that's the best the federal government of Canada can do. 8:30 till 4, 6 weeks for an appointment. I don't accept that that's the best we can do because I know that a private business would run that so much more efficiently. So much more. It is crazy how many people just came out with the attitude of, well, that's just the way it is. No, we should demand better of our federal government and our federal services. Look at the amount of money that comes off your paycheck every couple of weeks. You should expect platinum premium service. And we're not getting that here in Canada. It is an indictment of the federal government that nothing has gotten any better. Oh, and by the way, I won't even have that passport until probably the first week of July, they said. It's the 21st of May. Seriously? That's the best we can do. For all the money that we send to Ottawa, that's the best we can do. If there's anybody in the federal government listening, let me give you a nickel's worth of free advice. For the one touch point that Canadians have with our federal government, God damn it, you guys got to pick up the service a little bit. You've got to get people in and out of there quickly. And you know what? This organized campaign, this assault campaign on people who dare criticize federal services online, you guys got to stop. It's very transparent. And most people with common sense that are sick and tired of being ripped off by this government can see it. They know this whole system doesn't work. Who are the people that are defending this system? There's no way you would do it unless you had a vested interest in it. You're either a civil servant or you're getting paid. That's the only reason you could possibly defend this system that we have. Anyway, friends, there's a bit of a rant for you to start off the pod. I just wanted to get it out there that Service Canada has a hell of a lot of work to do to get us Canadians believing that our federal government has got things in hand. There's very few things we actually expect from our federal government. Basic services. Pensions, the dental service, since it's free, I guess, passport renewals, things like that. This should be easy. Private companies have figured this out. How come the federal government can't figure it out? Unless they truly just don't care. All right, friends, there's 2 people you're going to hear from on this episode of After 9. You're going to hear from the Prime Minister, who yesterday said a lot of interesting things. The real Mark Carney is really starting to come out. But I'm going to save those beauties until the second part of the pod. I want to go right now to a great interview that I watched yesterday on CNBC with Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon. You want to talk about efficiency? There's somebody who's got it down pat. There's somebody who has figured it out so that you can sit in your living room with your phone, buy something, and have it delivered to your front door for a reasonable price the same day. We could never expect that kind of efficiency from the federal government. It takes private industry to do stuff like that, and Jeff Bezos has perfected it. He sat down for a wide-ranging interview yesterday on CNBC, and there's a couple of parts that I think you should hear. Let's listen to one of the richest men in the world.
So, I started thinking about this and doing some research. A nurse in Queens who makes $75,000 a year pays more than $12,000 a year in taxes. Does that really make sense? So people talk about, making the tax system more progressive. How about we start by having the nurse in Queens not pay taxes? Why is a nurse in Queens who makes $75,000 a year paying more than $1,000 a month in taxes? That's $1,000 a month that could help with rent or groceries or anything. And so, and by the way, do you know what that all adds up to? The bottom half of income earners in this country pay only 3% of the taxes. It's only 3%. We can find 3%. So we don't have, it's a small amount of money for the government, that. And really, and the more I thought about it, to me, it's kind of absurd that we're doing this.
Okay, I'm going to pause Jeff Bezos there, but I will play more of what he had to say in just a second. He's got a point. Let's think about that. The lowest income earners are still paying a lot of tax, and he's talking about the American system. Frankly, if I made $75,000 a year and only paid $12,000 a year in taxes, I'd probably be pumped. But Americans are not used to that, and they're livid. $12,000 out of the $75,000 you made goes to the government. And what do you get for it? And by the way, the government doesn't even really care. All of us low-income earners that are paying that 12 out of our 75, all of that added up only equals 3% of the government's revenue. 3%. That's a relatively small amount of money. Basically, what Jeff Bezos is going to try and suggest here is that the lower income earners don't pay any tax at all. Could we get behind something like that? That clip is going to come up.
Quoted all the time is, the wealthy should pay their fair share. Right. And we can argue about what the fair share is. That's a policy debate. That's okay. But the vilification is the thing that's just the distraction. And by the way, if you really are being honest about it, we don't have a revenue problem in this country. We already have the most progressive tax system in the world. The top 1% of taxpayers pay 40% of all the tax revenue. The bottom half pay only 3%. We have already, and I think it should be zero. I don't think it should be 3%. Right. I think it should be zero. So we'd be making it more progressive that way. We actually have a spending problem.
Amen. Preach. The government brings in more than enough money to offer the services that we expect from the federal government. The problem is not the revenue they're bringing in, it's the amount that they're spending. And that's what Jeff Bezos is getting at. Did you hear that stat in there? Did you hear that stat? The top 1% of income earners pay 40% of the taxes. The bottom makes up 3%. That is a significant amount of money if you're paying $12,000 in tax out of a $75,000 income. Again, that is a significant amount of money. But it doesn't really make a difference to the government. That's only 3% of their revenue. It's hard on the people, doesn't make a difference to the government. Is there a better way? What Jeff Bezos is getting at here is quite simple. The government doesn't need to bring in more tax revenue. They need to spend less. If you took out that 3% of tax revenue, what does it equal? I don't know, $500 million, maybe $1 billion? Why don't we just cut spending by $1 billion and charge the lower income earners no tax, or a fair tax that's manageable and more proportionate to your income? Interesting ideas coming here from one of the richest men in the world.
At the very beginning, where does this, kind of this anger come from? And, and I said it's kind of, a tale of two economies. And I think that really is what's going on. But there are also some deep misconceptions that are worth people thinking about. And there are a lot of people who don't understand this kind of zero-sum fallacy. Right. So, they think that if there's a bunch of wealth over here, that there's a fixed pie.
Right.
We've got one pizza, and there are 7 people, and there are 8 slices. Who's going to get 2 slices? That is not how economies work. So it isn't a fixed pie. It grows. So and people get their mental model is that wealth is like water in a drought or food in a famine. It's you could hoard food in a famine. You could hoard gasoline in an energy crisis. You could hoard water in a drought. You could hoard toilet paper in a pandemic, as people did. But you can't hoard investment, right? So if you have stock in a company, that's not hoarding, that's investing. And investing is more like farming. And you would definitely want to farm in a famine. Do you see what I'm saying? And so this, by the way, the billions of dollars of investment that have come here have come from that Amazon stock. Right. And by the way, when I sold that Amazon stock, I paid capital gains on it.
Okay, kind of a labored metaphor here, if I'm being honest. But when he got to the end there, he tied it all together nicely, and it started to make sense. Are you starting to understand how Jeff Bezos looks at the economy? It was an interesting analogy. I thought that was good the way he explained that. Let's get to a little bit more, though, on his taxes. He brought it up. He pointed out he pays capital gains. No doubt that is a substantial amount of money. It is for anybody who buys and sells investments. Let's find out about Jeff and his taxes.
The other issue on the tax front is whether people of great means at the very, very top end, and Elizabeth Warren has made this point repeatedly, I think she's made it in reference to you and others, are able to pay a lower tax rate, even though you're paying an enormous sum in taxes, a lower tax rate than maybe I am. These people
sometimes say that I don't pay taxes. That's not true. I pay billions of dollars in taxes. And it's a perfect, again, if people want me to pay more billions, then let's have that debate. But don't pretend, that's going to solve the problem. You could double the taxes I pay, and it's not going to help that teacher in Queens. I promise you. You can't connect those two things, not logically. There are more examples. Why is rent expensive? Why is rent so expensive? I recently saw somebody blamed it on Airbnb. Okay, Airbnb is not the cause of expensive rent. In fact, it's been almost, let me finish here 1 sec. It's already been outlawed in New York City, and rents are still very high. So we know Airbnb isn't causing high rents. What's really causing high rent is government intervention. We subsidize demand with things like tax policy, which is fine, but at the same time, we constrain supply. We constrain supply with things like zoning and permitting. Why does it take so long to get something permitted to build? If you want rents to come down, Econ 101, really simple. You need to, you can't sort of subsidize supply. Subsidize demand and constrain supply. If you do, prices are going to skyrocket. But this is not anybody's fault other than government policy. And this is fixable. Again, this is a skills issue.
What an insightful answer. I was on the edge of my seat watching that yesterday when he said that, and it occurred to me there are so many parallels with the Canadian situation. Government is the reason we are in the situation we're in, for all the different reasons that Jeff Bezos just explained. And here in Canada, we have an alternative. We have Pierre Poilievre, who's saying things like, get government out of the way. Rapidly start approving permits. Let's get stuff done. Let's get shovels in the ground. Doesn't it make sense that that is the perfectly reasonable way to deal with this situation, not with more government bureaucracy? Well, government bureaucracy is bountiful right now in Canada, and I'm going to play some of the Prime Minister coming up in a few minutes so you can hear it yourself. Either way, think about what Jeff Bezos said there. He's talking about a problem that they have in America that we also have here in Canada. It's a big problem. Supply and demand has always dictated value. Always. Why are we not applying that to basic things that people need? Real interesting stuff there. He kind of sounds like he's got some political ambitions here. If I'm being honest, Jeff Bezos sounds like, maybe I start putting up the argument now for why I should be elected. Donald Trump's only got 3 more years. Maybe I should start jockeying now to eventually take over as CEO of America. Hard to say. He actually talked about how much he likes Donald Trump right now.
I mean, I'm comparing him to his first term, and I think he is a more mature, more disciplined version of himself than he was in his first term. I'm on the side of America, and that is so important. And that's where business leaders should be. Trump has lots of good ideas, and he's been right about a lot of things. You have to give him credit where credit is due.
That just a compilation of some of the things that he said about President Trump. Interesting stuff. Again, that was on CNBC. Jeff Bezos from Amazon and many other companies talking about the economy, talking about taxation, and talking about more. If you get an opportunity, I highly recommend it. I thought that was a great interview. Now, one of the other things that came up, and this is the last clip I'm going to play, he was talking about his ownership stake in the Washington Post. Jeff Bezos bailed out the Washington Post. Then he laid off a whole bunch of staff, and people got angry. People thought, okay, Jeff Bezos, he's kind of a lefty. He's going to come in and buy the Washington Post and restore that powerful left voice. Well, Jeff doesn't sound like somebody on the left right now. He actually sounds like someone much closer to the center, or maybe even center right. He did let go of a lot of people at the Washington Post, and here he explains why. This is an interesting explanation.
Talking about markets. I was going to ask you about the news market. Because you own the Washington Post.
Yes.
And one of the critiques, by the way, and this is maybe the wealth critique and everything else, is, we just said the company laid off about 30% of its staff.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people out there who said, Jeff's super wealthy. He's talked about this being a public trust. It's something that he bought early on, how much you care about that piece of it. Why lay people off? Why fire people? Why do you need to subsidize the business if, in fact...
Because the Post needs to be a profitable enterprise that stands on its own 2 feet. It needs to be...
But does it?
Yes.
I mean, that's a question. Some people say it should be a trust.
And let me tell you why.
Okay.
Because it's a measure of its relevance. If people won't pay for our product, it's not a good enough product. It's like, doing... it would be like poetry without rhyming. It's too easy. So it's got to be something that people will pay for, because that's a signal.
Right.
It's a signal that we're providing a relevant service. Your paper, the New York Times, you guys make a ton of money. You guys are doing very well financially, and you're providing a service that people are willing to pay for. We can do that too. And guess what I told them, when we were planning those layoffs?
Right.
I didn't pick who was going to get laid off or which departments. I said, follow the data. Follow the data. And I said, there's one exception to this.
What's that?
Don't follow the data on investigative reporting. The heart of the Post is investigative reporting. And guess what? Our newsroom today, even after the layoffs, is still larger than when we did Watergate and the Pentagon Papers. And we just won the Pulitzer Prize for Public Service, the most prestigious prize, prestigious Pulitzer for our investigation into Doge. The Post is going to continue to be an important institution. In fact, it's going to be a more important institution because of this financial discipline. It needs to be relevant to readers. It needs to stand on its own 2 feet. I don't want it to be a charity. It doesn't need to be, and it shouldn't be.
Very interesting comments. Now, that's a very common theory in business. Does it apply to government services? Kind of a theme in this episode. Hey, Canada Post is a great example. If people aren't willing to pay for it, if people aren't willing to use the service, should we keep the service? Should it stand on its own 2 feet, or should we constantly keep subsidizing it? Interesting. I'm not picking a side on this. That's an open-ended debate question. We can talk about that anytime you want.
Support for the show comes from Public, the investing platform for those who take it seriously. On Public, you can build a multi-asset portfolio of stocks, bonds, options, crypto, and now generated assets, which allow you to turn any idea into an investable index with AI. It all starts with your prompt. From renewable energy companies with high free cash flow to semiconductor suppliers growing revenue over 20% year over year, you can literally type any prompt and put the AI to work. It screens thousands of stocks, builds a one-of-a-kind index, and lets you backtest it against the S&P 500. Then you can invest in a few clicks. Generated assets are like ETFs with infinite possibilities, completely customizable and based on your thesis, not someone else's. Go to public.com/podcast and earn an uncapped 1% bonus when you transfer your portfolio. That's public.com/podcast. Paid for by Public Investing. Brokerage services by Open to the Public Investing Inc. Member FINRA and SIPC. Advisory services by Public Advisors LLC, SEC registered advisor. Generated assets is an interactive analysis tool. Output is for informational purposes only and is not an investment recommendation or advice. Complete disclosures available at public.com/disclosures.
Friends, I'm going to move on now. The Jeff Bezos interview from CNBC is available on YouTube if you want to see it. Right now, the Prime Minister is out on the West Coast. He was in BC yesterday trying to pacify the Premier, David Eby, who's acting like a real child right now. Very, very bent out of shape that Danielle Smith and Alberta is taking up the lion's share of the Prime Minister's attention. During a speech to the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade, the Prime Minister had a number of interesting things to say. I said earlier, the real Mark Carney is starting to come out. Here we go.
Building on November's MOU, last week we signed what's called an implementation agreement. It covers regulation, markets, methane, renewables, and carbon capture. It commits Alberta to methane reductions of 75% by 2035. Crucially, it creates a carbon market that actually works, raising the effective carbon price 6.5 times by 2040, with binding annual benchmarks, in other words, a floor, and reinforced by 75 million tons of carbon contracts for differences. In other words, Ottawa and Edmonton will have significant skin in the game for this market to work.
Going to spend a lot of your tax dollars on this, but let's go back to the number. One of the things that people who I'm not sure who the actual person is that would say this, but I've heard this a lot. Mark Carney, don't worry, he's not the same as Justin Trudeau. No, Mark Carney is much more mature than Justin Trudeau. In fact, I think Mark Carney is a conservative. That's one of the comments that I hear fairly regularly. Mark Carney is not Justin Trudeau. Really? Because he's actually going much further now than Justin Trudeau. You just heard him say it. The carbon tax is going up. He's going after methane. That's the cows. He's going after a much, much, much higher cost of living for Canadians. It's exactly what he's doing. And you know what? You don't even have to rewind it. I'll play it again. Listen carefully to him talk about the carbon credit market, an increasing carbon tax, and capping methane.
Renewables and carbon capture. It commits Alberta to methane reductions of 75% by 2035. Crucially, it creates a carbon market that actually works, raising the effective carbon price 6.5 times by 2040, with binding annual benchmarks, in other words, a floor, and reinforced by 75 million tons of carbon contracts for differences. In other words, Ottawa and Edmonton will have significant skin in the game for this market.
I am so disappointed in Premier Danielle Smith. So disappointed in her. You know, this was an opportunity. Pierre Poilievre got rid of the consumer carbon tax. We're not paying that right now because of Pierre Poilievre and the intense political pressure he put on the Liberals. They had to get rid of it. The Prime Minister said it was divisive, but he also kind of let on that the carbon tax was gone. Well, it's clearly not. In fact, it was a condition for Alberta to make any progress on a pipeline that there has to be a carbon market and a price on carbon, and they have to reduce emissions. That was Danielle Smith's opportunity to get rid of the industrial carbon tax. She should have flat out told the Prime Minister, you can go back to Ottawa and shove it. We are not doing carbon pricing in Alberta. And the simple reason is this. No matter how much you pay in taxes, no matter how much, it's not going to change the weather. It's not. And the Prime Minister is going to make a hell of a lot of money off of this Between him, his buddies, his companies, his investments, they're going to make a fortune off of this. Canadians are going to pay the price. They're gonna.
And the last is related to the existential challenge of climate change and the transition to net zero that's necessary to combat it. Now, Canadians are feeling the impacts of this at their kitchen table, at the pumps, and on the factory floors. And the good news for us in this room and across the country is that unlike many countries, Canada can be part of the solution. And that creates an enormous strategic opportunity. We can be part of the solution for the world and for ourselves.
Okay, the Prime Minister going on and on again about his green ideology. He's got it. Don't you tell me he's different than Justin Trudeau. He's worse than Justin Trudeau when it comes to environmental ideology. He made it a condition that for Alberta to start to become prosperous, they need a carbon market, they need to cut methane, they need to introduce carbon capture. All of these green technologies are making a lot of people wealthy, and they're costing regular Canadians a lot.
Now, as you may have heard, we're also advancing discussions on a potential pipeline to transport at least 1 million barrels a day of low-emission Alberta crude to Asian markets.
Potential. He's not going to commit until he gets every piece of green ideology in there that he can. Potential, because he doesn't want to say we're building a pipeline. We all agree we need a pipeline. The Prime Minister's still saying potential pipeline. Okay.
The pipeline will only advance. Thank you. There we go. I'd like to welcome the pathways to this. The pipeline will only be advanced with the following prerequisites being met. And the first is the building of pathways, renamed the Oil Sands Alliance. This is the world's largest carbon capture, utilization, and storage project. It will make Alberta oil amongst the lowest carbon intensity per barrel produced. In other words, on a Scope 1, Scope 2 basis. Secondly, it requires that British Columbians should share substantial economic and financial benefits from projects that include or impact them. And thirdly, it requires fully respecting Canada's duty to consult under Section 35 of the Constitution.
Why does BC get so much of Alberta's money? Why is that? Because they're allowing a pipeline to go through their province? Does it take up that much room? I believe that pipeline goes in a trench that's no wider than 8 feet. How much do we have to give them for that? I don't know, man. I'm listening to the Prime Minister here, and you can almost hear it in Trudeau's voice. You can almost hear Trudeau giving the exact same speech. Although, as we know, Trudeau never went this far. Mark Carney is going to make his investments into green technology the condition for Alberta to build a pipeline. And who's going to benefit from that? Well, first and foremost, the environmentalists are going to benefit. The ones who have money invested in it.
And the last is related to the existential challenge of climate change and the transition to net zero.
Existential threat of climate change, transitioning to net zero. You've heard this before. You know it's expensive. Everyone knows what happens here when the government doubles down on green ideology. I'm wondering how many people are going to say, wow, I got duped. You know, when he got rid of the carbon tax, that was good enough for me. I believed he wasn't Justin Trudeau. I believed he didn't subscribe to all that environmental ideology. I thought he at least understood that we can't change the weather by paying more in taxes. I thought he understood all that. If you're one of those people who gave him the benefit of the doubt because you thought he was different than Justin Trudeau, he's worse. He just said it in his own words. He just said it. If you missed part of it, rewind and go back. I'm playing for you direct, long-form quotes from the Prime Minister yesterday at the Greater Vancouver Board of Trade. Those are his words. Net zero. We're going there, no matter how much it costs us. You've heard him say it numerous times. Oh, and by the way, just like Justin Trudeau, and this should be good for one of his other side businesses as well, the Prime Minister would appreciate if we would all go and get a heat pump and get rid of our furnaces.
from expensive propane, oil, electric baseboard heating to more affordable electric heat pumps. And with the right investment, 7 in 10 Canadians will pay less for their energy by 2050. That's more than $15 billion back into their pockets. Go back to my theme. In a rapidly changing world, Canada must become the source of affordable, clean, and reliable power. Because when we master energy, we master our destiny.
He's all words. It's all platitudes. Get a heat pump? Come on. Hey, heat pumps are fine for some people. They are. But they're not for everybody. Saying that 7 in 10 Canadians will pay less for energy in 2050. He kind of leaves that part out. He says that one kind of under his breath. Yes, in 25 years, your hydro bill will go down. That's what they're saying. And by the way, he's talking specifically about electricity, not about traditional energy. Gas, natural gas, oil, those sorts of things. Mark Carney is just as much the environmentalist that we always suspected he might be, but he wouldn't show his stripes. He wouldn't do it. But now he's got to do it. It's the only way that he can get that pipeline, kind of stick handle that political issue, but also guarantee massive return on investment for the companies that he loves. Those green ideology companies, the green technology companies. That's what this prime minister is all about. There's no way to deny it. You just heard him say it. This is what we're doing. Canada's back on a path to net zero. And he's going to gaslight you into thinking, oh, you can be part of the solution. You can save a ton of money this way. Not until 2050, and it's only 7 out of 10. I don't know. Where do we go from here? This is where we're at. We're now Trudeau 2.0. But this one's even worse because this one is actually effective. He somehow convinced Danielle Smith to agree to a carbon tax. I don't know if I'm going to forgive Premier Smith for doing that. She should have never, ever agreed to that. You know what? It's not too late, Danielle. Say no. Say no, we're not doing any of this. We have our oil. We're going to sell it to the world. And if you won't let us build a pipeline the way we need to, then we're just going to send that oil down to the States and ship it out through them. Alberta doesn't need to go through the prime minister. If you're listening to me in Alberta right now, you've got to understand this prime minister, he's not thinking of you and thinking, wow, we should really allow Albertans to harvest their product and put it out to market and become extremely prosperous. He's not thinking like that. He's thinking how his green technology companies can make even more money. Canadians be damned. We're not the priority here. Not now. Not until at least 2050, anyway.
In the weeks ahead, we will engage with British Columbia. In fact, the hours ahead, I'm going to see the Premier in a moment, with British Columbia and all the provinces and territories on changes to the federal carbon pricing benchmark to align those with these new commitments.
There it is. It's going to happen all across Canada. The deal that Mark Carney, sort of a deal, it's an MOU. The deal that Mark Carney worked out with Alberta is the template for the whole country now. That's where we're at. The carbon tax is not gone. The Liberals swore it was gone till they were blue in the face. It's gone. We got rid of it. You just heard the Prime Minister talk about how it's not gone and it's going up, just so you know. Now, it wasn't all bad. One comment from the Prime Minister here actually made me smile a little bit. This is someone who's a former governor of the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England that's now the Prime Minister. Well, that changes your day quite a bit.
I was listening to your comments, and what I heard you say around the priority of ranking, affordability becomes a top concern. I hearken back to almost 15 years ago to this day. You were on our stage as the Bank of Canada governor. We might have a photograph.
There isn't a transcript, is there?
But you focused your remarks and your presentation. There we are.
So young.
We all probably.
That's when I only had to make one decision. 8 times a year. Yeah.
One decision 8 times a year. Being the governor of a central bank must be one hell of a job. Friends, I'm going to leave it there. Tomorrow, listener DMs. I've got some great ones that have come in on a wide variety of topics. Not all of them political, by the way. I can't wait to take that up with you tomorrow on a new episode of Scott Fox After 9. Hey, listen. This was a bit of a heavier episode. I know that I was a little more aggressive in prosecuting the Prime Minister today, but it needs to be done. If we're going to save the middle class in this country, if we're going to prevent a total wipeout financially of the middle class in this country, we got to stop Mark Carney from doing what he's about to do, because it is going to bankrupt the middle class. They can't afford it, and it is not going to make Canada any stronger, because Alberta oil is going to be hamstrung, and frankly, that's the gas that's going to make this car called Canada go. I'll catch you right back here in less than 24 hours, and I leave you now with the sounds of Pat James and The Whole Truth. Hey now.
Being outside is good for us. It's that simple. And trails make it easy for us to walk, bike, and be active outside in our own backyards. On the trail, we see people moving, connecting with their communities, making the places where they live great. For 40 years, Rails to Trails Conservancy has led the way, creating trails across the country, making it safer and easier for everyone to get outside. They want you to get involved. Find your trail and start your journey today at railstotrails.org/iHeart and follow at Rails to Trails on social.